All right. So, 1917. You've been talking about this movie for months, wanting to see it. So, you've finally seen it, but you told
Yes.
me, yeah, but you told me off the record that you weren't able to see it in the movies, but you were able to see it recently. Was it as you expected?
It was what I expected, but then was more than I expected, and more in an actual good way and surprising way.
Ooh, do go on.
Well, like my big thing that really stood out was the whole promise of just it being one shot, so to speak. Like the whole movie from start to finish would just flow through. No cutaways, no fadeaways, no 3 hours later, no 25 minutes later, no cutting away to, you know, loved ones back at home wondering how things are going. But then when I watched it, in the first 5 minutes, I was blown away because the attention to detail that they put in with not only the appearance of the soldiers, the mood of the time, it was the really, really small things. So those who have watched it would have hopefully noticed when he goes down the trenches, you notice that different soldiers have their actual country flags on their arms to represent what country they're fighting for. So a lot of people don't realize that in the trenches, it wasn't just the British, it wasn't just the Yanks, it wasn't just the Australians. You know, you had French soldiers, you had people from Belgium, you had people from the Netherlands, everywhere, and they put little patches on their arms, not always off the actual flag, but even if they could just find strips of color, and a lot of them had that, and things like that, and seeing little rats kind of scurrying underneath their feet, it was a great commitment to detail that made the experience feel more like you were there. That's something that really blew my mind from start to finish, was just those little tiny details I had.
Do you think that even though mentioning about the details, that it had to be almost a given that they would have to do that? Because in most recent of times, we haven't really been seeing any sort of movies that really gone through trench warfare, um, especially with World War One, other than possibly movies that may have gone straight to DVD or they were not A-lister movies. Do you think that the detail just had to be there? Like it would almost be like a disservice if it wasn't?
Oh, hands down. Especially, even in the lead up, Sam Mendes, openly said that the inspiration and the stories behind it came from his own father, also grandfather, Lance Corporal Mendes, and the stories that he told him growing up. So I think for him, it would have not only been a dissatisfaction to those who serve, but also a dissatisfaction to his own family.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. I don't think there's anything to disagree on it. But what I was curious to know is because for me, watching 1917, I I I did see it, but um, it didn't really catch on at first. Even though I think I probably remember it at the end of the movie, where just sort of reliving it and whatnot. Because it's definitely not a movie that is a short one. It's definitely does take its time in terms of pacing and whatnot. And how did you feel about how long it took? Because I think there was a movie that was about over 2 hours or just under. I can't remember.
Just under. It was an hour and 58 in total in the end. But yeah, I think it's something that had to be paced because, I mean, it wasn't a short war by any means. So if you made the storyline short, it wouldn't really service the actual war itself because, that war was literally fought inch for inch. So you've got to make a movie to match that.
Yeah, and I think also as well, I like the fact that this is now in this particular time of this movie of 1917. They've had to use, or it's a story that they had to use in terms of communication, the runners, which is what our main protagonist is. He's a runner for the British Army. So when from what I read, especially after 1917 came out in the States, and I did a real research of it, and I knew a little bit of it, but back in World War One, they used to, of course, have the pigeon communication, but that proved to be almost that sucked with killing of the birds. And then I think there was certain amount of communication by phone, but obviously you have to get lines through, you have to get lines from such and place to such and place, and that proved to be almost it was an annoyance because they could either be cut, the wires get cut, or it gets blown up from mortar shells or whatever. And then the last, I think, remaining form of communication was a runner, which was somebody who had to pass on a message either. I think at this time it was always verbally. Is that right?
Either verbally or, like as demonstrated in the film, could also be done with a handwritten note. Or lastly, as well, there was also the use of flares, which were used as just a straightforward, yes, it's okay to come ahead kind of message. But yeah, the communication back then was very limited and very restricted, which again would be such a frustrating time to be in.
Yeah, because definitely if you were a runner, you're pretty much you're you're quite possibly you're a big target. And I remember I think runners used to have special armbands that they used to wear, and then because they were getting picked off by the enemy, then they would take off those armbands and of course just try and be normally dressed soldiers, but weighing or carrying lighter equipment. And I would have thought that as well. Having anything written would definitely be a massive compromise because, again, if you get shot and then you search the satchel or search their gear and they have this message, then it's clear as day that the enemy knows what you're doing. So um, verbally as well, which obviously at the pivotal point of the movie, he manages to deliver the message. The worst thing is as well, delivering that message is it may not be believed.
No, exactly right. Because especially for the runners who may have removed their bands, or in a situation like his, which we'll get some a bit more detail later on, looking a little bit ragged and looking a little bit, guess in a way you could come across as a deserter or someone who's just tried to flee. And you've got to try and prove that you've got that message, you've got the rights to it. And a lot of times you didn't get that brief moment where you could be like, just give me just 1 second. It's just like, no, mate, you've got to deliver that message, get it across quickly, and sound believable.
Yeah, because by the time he did reach that I believe it was a general or whoever it was, Benedict Cumberbatch, um, he was completely stripped of everything compared to what he was in the beginning of the film, where he had all his equipment, he had his vest, he had his rigging, he had his gun, and then by the time he ended up at that place, he was just completely like, look, clothes were torn. He looked like, yeah, you're right. He kind of looked like a deserter. And then when he delivered his message, it was like they didn't believe him. And I was just like, oh, could you imagine? I couldn't, but could you imagine just you know you you completely disobey those orders, and then Lord knows what they did, because considering that trench warfare, where if you didn't go over the top, there was always somebody or a couple of people that would just make sure that you were still going to get shot if you didn't go over the top. So I've always thought that that kind of, especially unfortunately with the British, sometimes their methods of doing things were, you know, questionable.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like um, that kind of like moment where he delivered the message, it really kind of made me think back to the Australian film Gallipoli. That
Oh
very
yeah.
like final scene where the artillery fires way too early and they're like, should we run over? Should we wait? And they send Mel Gibson's character to run down to try and get the message, and gets the clear to say no, don't jump over. And he's like sprinting like all hell to get back, and then he hears the whistles blowing. He knew he failed, and I was just like, oh, that heart wrenching moment. Like it brought me back to that film, and I was like, oh, I don't want to be there.
And that one was actually quite brutal in the in that day when they made it. And then you look at this sort of movie, and um, I mean, I know we skipped all the way to sort of the end, but going back to the beginning where runners were always paired together usually, so it was always two people. And then the one that was accompanying our main character, which I believe was, what was his name?
We had Blake and Sheffield.
Is it Schofield or they? Well, depending on people's pronunciation, it could be Schofield, but I believe that could be an American pronunciation. But yeah, it was Lance Corporal Blake and Lance Corporal Schofield or Schofield, and it just again that sort of brutality, especially with this particular movie where it was as a one shot. I have to go straight to that part where he's doing the right thing. He's trying to help the enemy, and the enemy inadvertently attacks him. Well, not inadvertently, but just gets up and attacks him, which is it literally, um, yeah, I was in shock.
Yeah, no, that whole scene was really tense. Like, even when the because it was the pilot that stabbed Blake, and like leading up to it, the pilot crashed, and you could hear the plane on fire, and he was screaming out for help, and you could see when they pulled him out, his legs were on fire, and they're doing the right thing to like save a guy from a horrific, really horrific death. But I'm guessing that for them, they're like, you're my enemy, but no one should go through what you're going to go through. Try and help a guy out, and then of course naturally his survival instincts kick in, and he tries defend himself, and it ends up in being a really really visceral and slow death. So it again just really gave it as it was.
Yeah, it was just painful to watch because I think quite a lot of people in their own survival instincts would just be they they may not want to make that mistake of trying to save the enemy and just shoot him. And lo and behold, in this particular story, his kindness came back and got him in the form of just a small stab. Now, it wasn't a small stab, but it looked as if that, from what I saw, it wasn't in the liver. It was in the bottom right hand part of his stomach, um, near the waistline. So I don't know. I mean, we can only assume or guess that because he died as slowly and agonizingly as he did, that must have been a stab at some sort of, I don't know, some sort of major organ or something. I don't know.
Well, given the amount of blood that he had coming out, it's easy to say that something got hit on the way up. So whether it was like a straight in, or he's gone up on an angle that's kind of hit something and then come out on the way out, and you could tell like even Sheffield was concerned because he was trying to bandage it and put pressure on it, and you could tell like the way he reacted. Time was of the essence. He wanted to try and find a medical sword or a health station to try and cover him up, but of course couldn't pick him up, couldn't drag him, way too heavy to drag himself, and just all he could do was just sit there and just talk to him as he went. And again, that was just another demonstration of what it was like with friends who lost each other and just being there in their final moments. And you see him carry that with him for a good portion of the rest of the film, and it just, oh man, that ate at me the whole time.
Because yeah, especially you're on a mission together. It's just you and this second guy, and then um, and also it looks as if that you're going to a place where the second guy, is going to, or who wants to actually see a relative of his, which is his brother, who's serving on a different line. So the other thing I wanted to point out was the pacing. So following him, actually, the other scene that was in terms of pacing was when he's on his own. Obviously, he's hitched a ride with who was it? Mark Strong's character, was Mark Strong his name?
Yeah, Mark Strong's character, who was playing Captain Smith.
That's the one, Captain Smith. So he hitches a ride with him, and then he they drop him off, and I think that I really liked that particular encounter that he had on his own against what looked like to be a sniper. Well, could be a sniper or just a rifleman, whatever it was. It was one guy in that building, and he had to cross over that water bridge and whatnot with all that gear and stuff. And just that particular um, encounter, you could see how obviously it reminds you of how the technology back in World War One or 1917, of course, um, was so limited because they had bolt action rifles and um, it was a slow and arduous fight. And then he eventually makes his way up there, and then all of a sudden, um, the the some bitch just sort of shoots him.
Yeah, I think as well. Cause I think he actually did nick him because when he opened that door to Fraction, he was kind of slouched down, so it kind of looked like he was hit, and probably had the expectation that Schofield was going to come up to finish the job, and he was like, you know what, if you're going to take me, I'm going, you're going down with me. Um, but I definitely agree. Like that scene was just heart racing, edgy as seed. Kind of wasn't fast paced by any sort of means, but it still kept me on the edge of my seat because I'm just like, fuck, we just lost Blake, and now he's filled in a bloody situation getting shot at. Like, are we gonna lose another runner and have another flip in the movie and another flip in my emotions? It's just like, shit, man, don't do this to me.
Yeah, and it was just one of those, and that was just one of many events that had happened with him in terms of his journey, because his journey was, I think it was over the course of what, a night and 2 days and one night.
2 days and one night, yeah.
Because again, that other, I think that whole section of nighttime where he meets the woman and sees her, how she survived all that time in German occupied territory, is also it was a great break in the story in a way that it broke that action, or broke that journey that he was having. It was considered like a moment of respite where he's there eating, and then he just happens to stumble upon another survivor who's a civilian.
Yeah, and not only just a civilian, but looking after a random baby that she had found and had no idea whose it was, but she still looked after it because that natural, humanly instinct to look after something that's, can't look after itself. And it was also a really good scene to actually show Shotfield's real character because leading up to this, like his attitude towards Blake, came across a little bit arrogant. That he was, obviously had been through a lot because he did bring up a previous battle in their discussions where like, you weren't there, you don't know. But then all of a sudden, he sees this woman with this baby and he just literally dumps all his food out. He's like, you need this, take this. I don't need it, it's fine, have it. And then she's like, oh, but the baby needs milk. And, flashback a little bit, he got the milk from the farm before Blake was killed. And he's just like, yep, here you go, opens a bottle, lets her sniff it. And you see that like excitement from her that, it's something for the baby to help it survive. And I thought that moment there really showed Schofield as a person and as a human that, away from the battlefield, it brings out the better in him.
Yeah, definitely. It's a touch of humanity at the same time as providing a moment of respite, like I said, in terms of the story. And it was actually probably an encounter that was not uncommon. You think that you're going through a deserted area, and for some strange reason, somebody's there. Somebody's like hiding out and being quiet and in just this moment of refuge, uh, just away from everything, the war, and they just don't have anywhere to go and stuff. So I would find that it was uncommon. Sorry, I would probably think that it was kind of maybe common to find somebody there, but that's just a guess because it just felt natural in which that he had stumbled upon her. I felt.
Yeah, and even his reaction gave that away. He wasn't like startled or freaked out. He just put his hands up. He's like, I'm a friend. It's fine. And they just carried on.
Yeah, and that was actually a really good scene. Um, I think the other thing is what I was going to say was about the whole thing about the night is that when he disengages from her and he starts to move on, right? And he's fighting through these urban areas. He loses one of the most um recognizable parts of his kit, which is his helmet, right? And he's moving through these ruins and all that stuff, and he's just running for dear life when he gets discovered. And I think another great, again, not even just attention to detail, it's more of a um, playing definitely into realism where, if you're going to be running around with a bolt action rifle and you got to aim, of course, you have to stop and aim. You can't run around and be running and shooting at the same time. Like the pursuit of the Germans on Schofield was almost relentless. Like he was running a good 5 minutes, like full sprint at one stage, I think. Like I shouldn't say maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. Um, but just the way that they were just hunting him down and they were shooting, and there was definitely a lot of narrow misses. But um, I didn't think that that was like anything to do in relation to say like if people thought, oh, it's like stormtrooper aiming, or they're shit at trying to knock down this Brit, and then it's like okay, um, yeah, it just felt real. Like especially when he just walks up to that burning building, right, and then he's looking at this other guy that they're walking towards each other. You know that scene, and he thinks that it's a Brit, but then he finds out it's a German, and the guy just starts chasing him and just keeps shooting and just keeps missing.
Oh, that was a heartbeating moment again. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't like when I was watching that. Never once in my life I was like, or even during, I was like, nah, they're just shit shots. Like, oh my god, hashtag get good or anything like that. It was just like there's a scene there, like when he takes out the first German guy when he's in that little like camp area, and the second German who's clearly intoxicated because he's like a little bit stumbling and wobbly, and then he walks over and realizes it's a Brit, and he picks up the rifle and tries to shoot him like close range, and then he pocket shots him. So there's also the fact that those Germans might have been potentially a little bit inebriated and not expecting a random Brit to just walk through their campment. So there's the shock of the moment, the fact that they probably were a little bit relaxed, thinking, oh, British are miles away, everything's all good, and then all of a sudden there's this random Brit runner coming through your encampment. Like, you're not going to be a perfect shot from the get go. And um, again, just really, really well played. And it, the cinematography that they used for that scene, like actually having the long shot instead of a close up of like, most action movies where the heroes run away, they get really close up so you can see like the Brit falling apart. They kept the camera a little bit further back so you could actually see the Germans in the background as well. And you see one of them actually trip over on the way through. You're like, yes, that would happen. I would be that German. I am the dickhead that would trip over myself. I appreciate that.
Well, I've actually mixed up the order of events here, where he discovers that guy and then he goes underneath, hides, and then all of a sudden he walks into that German who's clearly taking a piss, and then he's trying to cover up his mouth, and again it's a bit of naivete in terms of no non-combat or not really experiencing combat, where he's covered the guy's mouth, and then he's like, "You're not going to say anything, right? Just be quiet." And then he uncovers his mouth. The German just yells out, "Fucking like." I think he yells out Englander, or is it like British or something?
Along those lines, yeah.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, this is where he's choked him to death, and then the other guy you see in the background who was like stumbling on the fire and stuff, he comes in, investigates, and Schofield starts running, and then this is the part where, sorry, I should be saying where he's just running at a full tilt for what seems like 5 minutes, but it's more like a good minute and a half where he jumps into the river.
Yes, but again, like the tension makes it feel that much longer. So it's just one of those moments where like it doesn't feel like it's that long, but well, actually, it feels like it's forever. But of course, if you have the clock up, you're just like, hang on, that felt so much longer because it built the tension really nicely.
Yeah, it definitely felt longer. Um, And then obviously I like that obviously being a one shot and stuff where it just follows him into the water. That was a nice touch.
It was, and then has him running down the river, doing the bopping and screaming, and then the part, like another part that I really liked in the attention to detail is when he gets towards the end of the river, and all the floating dead bodies are there, and of course I wouldn't say I'm a sadist or into decomp, but I really actually, again, when I say the attention to detail, when you see the floating body and it's got the puffy face and the tongue's out the mouth and it's puffed up, I looked at it and go, yes, that is what a dead body in a river looks like. Thank you.
Yeah, that was because they were supposed to be all they were all German bodies, right?
They were, yeah, which,
Oh, and
again,
some British and some
a
British.
couple of British, yeah, one or two British, but the big German guy stood out with his puffy tongue, and I was just like, oh man, that detail is beautiful, but so, yeah, at the same time.
Horrific.
Yeah. And it's like he's floating in those, and it's just like, ugh, man, like if a bullet doesn't kill you, infection's gonna get you, buddy.
Oof. And then just the fact that he was just this one man that stumbles into a whole I don't know, it looks like a platoon. I don't know. They're just all just sitting there, just listening to this guy sing.
Yeah, it was a bit of an odd switch, but then when it led in and revealed who they were, it kind of clicked on why they were sitting there enjoying that song. So weird switch, but then kind of made sense.
Exactly. And then, of course, you saw the. I remember there was, I think, there was definitely one African American or one black guy that was in the ranks as well. So that also sort of didn't wasn't a myth that you know black British were or just black people were involved in World War I, but they were involved. So that was nice to kind of see that inclusion as well.
Yeah, exactly right. And like I actually did smile when I saw him. I was like, oh yay, they really went down to the really nitty gritty details. So again, it was appreciated.
Yeah, it definitely was. And then, of course, then we reach up to the part that we were talking about earlier, where, yeah, he's scrambling to find Devons, to find, the one in charge before they go over. And yeah, it just looks as if like they're charging from a mound of like quartz or something. It's very white. It's very different. I didn't expect it to be like so bright, actually.
I didn't, but I think that for me it was kind of a bit of a demonstration of the difference of being on the front near no man's land to being on the front towards the northern side. So for me, it was like a kind of showing of the different fronts where people were fighting. So if you were near no man's land, like that place looked absolutely desolate. So further along, when you get away from no man's land, then it starts looking a little bit nicer.
Yeah, because I don't know in this part of history, I don't know where he ends up. It just looks as if that he just ends up in another trench where it's not even a trench. It's just like a big divot, and there's no homes. There's no, when I say homes, there's no, um, there's no dugouts or whatever. It just looks as if like they've just captured a divot trench or something.
Yeah, I thought like when I was thinking location wise, I thought they would have been close to the Argonne Forest, but could have been close to there because geographically, No Man's Land was near Argonne Forest at that time. So potentially they might have been on the forest edge if I was going to take a stab, but that's a very big stab.
Well, at the same time, where his mission is so close, and he decides to make that sprint, then you see like, oh, No Man's Land is just this green field.
God, that sprint scene. Oh man, that was really well done.
I think it was definitely it had to be done in such a way like that because, God, World War I was such a bizarre but also massive loss of life. I think you can't compare, but you have to say it in this context when you have. I think World War I was the most losses, or was it World War II? But I'm pretty sure, or I shouldn't say pretty sure, because now I'm doubting myself. But World War I seemed to just have more statistics of casualties of death because in the beginning, in that scene where he's running towards, that large field, through that large, no man's land or whatever, uh, as far as I remember, the warfare began with them walking when they used to go over the top, right?
Started off with yes, but then once all the lines were settled, that's where it became an inch-for-inch fight.
Yeah, so that's the thing where I think it's a massive what's it called? It's just a bizarre war. Um, Actually, another moment that I completely forgot was when he's trying to get into the place where he's trying to see Colonel Mackenzie, and those two guys are stopping him, and I'm like, "What are you doing?"
Kind of was like a bit poignant at that scene where he's like, why, guys, why? Let him through. Just let him in. Like, fuck.
But you were right in the beginning of this conversation. Why would they let in somebody who looks like he's been ill-equipped? He looks like he's a deserter. He's got no equipment on. He just looks like death. And it's like, why would you go in there and or even let him go in?
Which again was like a lot of the British mantra as well, like looking presentable. So he's a lance corporal looking like a drowned rat, wanting to present himself to a colonel, and he looks like that. So their mindset is like, no, 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 you are not presenting yourself like this. Bugger off.
Well, there you go. And then obviously he manages to meet the Colonel, Colonel Mackenzie, which is Benedict Cumberbatch's um, character, and then pass him the letter. And then Mackenzie's just like, oh, but bugger me, better do what the fucking letter says.
Yes, and then quite very ceremoniously says, go get yourself fixed up and fuck off, which I thought was just absolutely British to the T.
Oh, it's totally British, but it's just absolutely, I think, unnecessary as well. But then again, military, fuck, it's crazy. Say
Well,
something.
even like the fact that even beforehand, when like they get their original orders from the general, who was played by Colin Firth, he said, when you go see him, make sure there's witnesses because he was a glory hog and he wanted his moment. So, in a way, he's just had that moment taken away. So the fuck off kind of really sitted the character well for me.
What I was also saying was that I think the other thing where he's telling him to like fuck off and all that stuff, um, the, the it was a nice subtle change, as if that he's walked in there into this bunkered area and the sound just drowns out a little bit in terms of what is happening outside, and it's kind of like another world where this guy is he's the colonel is in a moderately safe, or it looks to be in a pretty safe position with sandbags and all that stuff, and he's just removed from everything.
Yeah, which I guess probably served the time frame well, and was probably used to demonstrate that feeling. Because I'm going to make a big assumption here, and I mean I don't mean any harm by it, but during the war, the soldiers who were in the trenches probably had a lot of disdain for the officers who were in their little bunkers and safely tucked away from everything, and had no fear of popping their head up for a cigarette and getting shot while they're looking up. So I think looking at that, if I was going to go from the stories that Mendes would have been told by his grandfather, especially if he's up, given that his grandfather was Lance Corporal, wasn't quite an officer, he probably had a bit of a disdain for officers being tucked away like that. So probably the use of drowning out the outside world while they're in there was probably to demonstrate that generalized feeling that officers were above soldiers, weren't in the ditches with them, weren't willing to get down and dirty. And I think that's what that scene was kind of used to demonstrate. But if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but that's just how I interpret it.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I don't think it's wrong. It's just another form of interpretation. Yeah. Um, I'm not going to disagree with it. It's just more of a it's I think it's an observation, a good observation. Um, and then of course as he's given that and he walks out and he tries to find or he eventually finds the brother uh of Lance Corporal Blake and gives him the bad news. Like what I mean, he did him service in terms of finally finding him, but another all too common scene in war where one brother survived and another has unfortunately died barely a couple of hours before, or maybe just like 12 hours before.
Yeah, and again, that scene was incredibly somber and like, there's no words I can put with this one, but I'll try. Um, the fact that I liked was that there was no music used for the scene, or really any of the scenes, but it was just quiet. You could hear the soldiers in the background, very far back, but it was very drowned out. So it really drew focus to the dialect between the two of them, and you could tell like it was hard to deliver that news, and there was no way to put it. It's just one of those things where you just didn't know how to take it. You just like that was real, like to the T of it, like handing him things and him just quenching his jaw, closing his hand, and just nodding and being like, "Yep, he was a good man." And in the back of his mind, knowing that he's just got to bury that and move on, and he's got another battle ahead of him, and he can't take that time. It's just that that was war, and that was the worst part of it.
And it's good acting as well, because yeah, that's definitely something that if you what did they tell? What do you hear in most sort of like military films? They say don't dwell on it. You got plenty of time to do that later. So again, it's something that um yeah that was echoed in this movie, and it wasn't it was done to a point where um I mean it just to be honest, I think it had to be done in that way because the there's always somebody who's got a different way of reacting to things, but when it's more, I think it's more poignant where they show those people who react to things where it's just silence and, like you say, clenching of the item and whatever it may be. So, um, yeah, it was a God, it was quite a moment. Um, and then of course he sits down by the tree, and that's pretty much but the end of the film. But from what I also I think remember from the movie was I think there was a lot of like eye shots, looking at his eyes, looking at Schofield's eyes, and you can see his face conveyed a lot, even though he didn't. For me, he didn't really say much. I think in the second half, sort of the film, it was more in the first half where there was quite a bit of talking, but in the second half I don't feel as if there was a lot of talking because he was obviously on his own for the second part of the journey.
Yeah, literally, like even with the interaction with the French girl, hardly ever said much, and I think that just really just I think that was used to really convey where he was at and where he got to. Like as we said at the start of the film, he's fresh. So is so is Blake. They're both fresh. They're both poppy. They get over crossover no man's land with no issues. They get to the German trenches, have a near-death experience, have a bit of a giggle. Like they're very merry, but then Blake's gone on his own, almost gets shot by a sniper, gets shot at by German soldiers, falls in a river, gets to the end of the river, dead corpses, crawls out, finds the officer, gets the message, gets told to fuck off, finds the brother, has to tell him the bad news. It's just like you don't go through all that and be the same person. Like, there's no way you can. And I think him not talking as much at the end was just, again, just really great research and really great demonstration and visualization of what that war was and what it was like for the individual. And again, like, I tip my hat to Mendez. He's done a brilliant job with that.
And then, of course, at the end, he just finally retires from his journey. Like, well, he doesn't retire, but he just sort of slumps over at a tree and just needs to catch his breath after all that's happened. So it's a it's a it's it's a different take on World War One in such a sense that he has done what he's could, and that's the kind of story that he has led in those 2 days and one night, whether it may be futile or whatnot. But it's his world, it's his mission to get that message across, and and just yeah, just get it done. I think that's what also. I mean, a lot of people would think that it doesn't, you know, who what he's done is kind of like sort of I don't know. It's useless because obviously they're going to attack again and this and this. But I think a lot of people also fail to grasp whether they've been in combat or not. And me, definitely not. But I know theoretically speaking, these guys don't know. These guys literally don't know if they're going to be living in the next 5 minutes or 20 seconds or whatever. And that's all that he could do. And if he fails that, then he's dead. So.
And not only would he be dead, like the 1,600 soldiers within the company would have been dead as well.
Yeah, that too. So, for for me, 1917, I think was or is a great movie to talk or and show quite a bit of a different side of things. This is definitely not you don't you don't get to see too much of the trenches. It's very actually very out there, out of walking around and stuff. Sort of I shouldn't say it's not non-restricted. So he's a runner and he has to get from point A to point B. It's a different take or look at World War One, where I think there's other movies that I wish I knew off the top of my head, but that I've seen where World War One, they fight in forests, they fight even in I think urban fighting as well, but again with the trenches and from what I just trying to think for us at AAA movies or whatever. I mean, I know there's been some movies with trench warfare for World War One in Canada, like some Canadian films, but for like Australia, Gallipoli, and all that stuff, we actually wait. We did have a TV series for Gallipoli, didn't we?
We did, yes. So it was the Anzacs.
Yeah, the Anzacs. Yeah, Jesus Christ, that was brutal.
Brutal, but again, another brilliant series.
Yeah, and that was a series as well. So there's again not a lot of World War One movies to sort of you know, to pay homage to. And this was another way of looking at um, this, this Lance Corporal's journey. And actually, now that I think about it, which I didn't think about at the time, the one shot works because you're just following him from point A to point B to point C to point D until he gets to his mission objective. And then his secondary objective is to find Lieutenant Blake, and then that's pretty much mission complete. Um, if we had to look at it from a very military sort of standpoint, that yeah, he got those messages across, and he saw the brother of the guy that he was paired up with, and he just retires next to a tree, sort of, and awaits what's going to happen next in the next I don't know the next day or so. So
Or it could have even been the next 20 minutes for Renee. Could have literally stunned in that tree, looked up and gone, whew, what a day, and then been called over to run a letter back to where he came from. So that moment him slumping the tree, that's probably the only reprieve he's going to get in a long time.
jeez, yeah, that's actually a really good point. Um, Was there any other sort of standout-ish or standout-ish sort of parts for you that you really liked? Or?
Um, for me, when the crossing of no man's land, um, that for me was just brilliant. Again, it was just the little things that they did that really stood out, like um, when they get told by the lieutenant how to get across, and he tells them, look for the bowing man, take a right there, and get behind the wire. And then they get to the bowing man, and you find out it's a dead German soldier, and Schofield gets his hand caught on the barbed wire, and then he sees he's got a bit of blood, and they slide down into that little gap, and his hand lands near a body that's got an open wound on it, and you see him quickly pull that hand up because open cut infection, he knows that's a no-go, so you kind of see him pull that hand up really quickly and keep that hand away from everything. So that little detail of him doing that through that crossing of no man's land until he got to the other side and was able to wash it out, um, that was just a really brilliant scene for me. It's seeing the old-fashioned World War One tank crashed in the middle of the field. Really liked that. And then even when they got to the German trenches, again, those details, I'm going to say details a lot because it was what really made it stand out. You see the German artillery guns, they've all been blown up by the Germans because, don't give your enemy your weapons. And then the horrifying moment where they find out that they've rigged the entire trench tunnels to be blown up when the British soldiers get in there. It's just like, that was the mindset back then. It's just like, we're going to abandon our trench, but if they come over here, they're going to die inside it, and we're gonna take them out like that. And it's just, again, those details. It's just like, ugh, fantastically done.
Hmm. I think if they were going to really show the visceral, um, if not probably the bloody part of the war, which is obviously the trench warfare, where they fought and they would every inch and everything. Um, like I told you in another podcast, I was saying that World War One. God, the stories that I read in terms of, and I think the one that was closest to showing some sort of brutality was that TV series, the one we just mentioned, which was Gallipoli, where, um, God, typical British shit, where they where they bombarded, I think the New Zealand front lines, where they were, or their trenches, or part of their trenches or something, and the New Zealanders were actually fighting against whoever they were fighting in Gallipoli. What was it? The Turks, or they were? Was it the Turks?
Was the Turks, yes, or the Ottoman Empire, as they were referred to.
Yeah, I was thinking. I didn't want to say Turks. I was going to say the Ottoman, but I was just like, wait, don't guess. And they showed them fighting, and it was in slow motion. And the narrator was saying that when all the this was probably the most poignant part that I remember about the series, but I should remember many more. But the narrator was saying when the New Zealand soldiers had run out of ammunition, they just pick up anything and everything to beat and batter their opponents, and you could just see it in slow motion. Just this landscape on this trench that sort of stretched away, and they're just brutally fighting, using everything that they could: pots and pans, knives, glass. And I was just like, Jesus, that's brutal. And I don't think it was a scene that lasted for about a good 20 seconds, but it was still brutal. And I think if there was anybody that was going to make another World War One film, unfortunately, that may be the next case of just showing how, pretty visceral that war was. But I would be hard pressed if anybody would want to make something like that because of again of how brutal it is.
Yeah, it's definitely not an easy time frame to tackle, and not only just tackle it, but deliver it and do it justice more than anything.
Yeah, because of probably because of its violence. But yeah, at the same time, I don't know. Do people really want to watch that? Because World War One was just a horrific affair. I mean, the thing is, the reason why I say that in terms of would anybody want to watch something like that is because we've grown accustomed, or people have grown accustomed to war in several mediums, like through fiction and non-fiction, and then especially video games. So yeah, it's just yeah. I'm thinking maybe that will be the next thing, but at the same time, these kind of movies, as historically as they should be and they should be remembered, should probably take a break because I think this 1917 was a great portrayal of a different side of war, um, but at the same time still capturing, what war was at that time.
Yeah, no, I'm actually polar opposite. Like, I think not take a break, but I think stop romanticizing them. I mean, you look at the war movies that have come before. Like I said, what gave us recently Midway, Pearl Harbor.
Oh my God, yeah.
They very romanticize it and make it more excitable. Um, really, when they kind of, and I'm going to say it, and a lot of people are going to crack it at me, but the American taste on it, where they have their whole "this is for America" kind of moment, and it propagates that war's this really wonderful, fantastic thing. Whereas films like 1917 and also like before this Dunkirk, that show you what war really was. And I think that's how it needs to be done. Because too often you watch those other films and you get excitable and you want to be a part of it. And you don't realize what it's actually like. And then you send these young kids who are full of hope into an actual warfare and a battlefield, and it breaks them because they don't know any better. They've got this ideology that it's for my country, for America, for my brothers, and it's not. And you watch these other ones, Dunkirk, 1917, and you see what war really is. And you sit there, and like I did, I sat there for a good 10 minutes after 1917 finished, and literally all I could think to myself was, thank fuck that was not me, because I could not handle that, and I do not want to ever experience it, nor have anyone else experience it. And I think that is where war movies need to be in delivering historical facts, doing them justice, but not sugarcoating it to the point where these kids and young people get this idea that war is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But you also bring up another good point where that's the different styles of essentially filmmaking as well as the stories that are being told. Like, yeah, I almost forgot about Dunkirk. Dunkirk was quite a bit not very similar to 1917, where not a lot of music was used. Silence was practically golden. And then showing the different sort of the chapters and the different sort of perspectives from ground to pilot to whatnot. So, to captain, then civilian and whatnot. So, um, yeah, you make a good point. It's that's probably the right word to use is romanticize it because yeah, with Midway, oh man, there's like explosions and a lot of Yahoo and all that stuff. So, um, yeah, that's a really good point. But to top it all off, I'm curious. What would you rate this out of five?
Oh, easily a five. Like, not even going to argue it.
Oh, perfect, just perfect.
Yeah, literally.
I'd probably say 4 out of 5. And it's nothing to do with the movie itself. It's just in terms of, as weird as that sounds, it's just my preference. Like the trench warfare as well as World War I. Again, like I've said in a previous podcast, yeah, that kind of stuff is just it actually horrifies me. It horrifies me what I've heard, the kind of trench warfare that they had, and then um, just the kind of military strategies that were tested, and then those tests were killing more people, and then just commanders' thinkings, and unfortunately the British people's thinkings in terms of their officers and making their decisions. Um, that's a personal thing. The movie was great though. For me though, I'm not sure if I would want to watch that again anytime soon because of how it's definitely one of those things where you don't want to be distracted from it. You want to be all eyes in and 100% focused on it.
Yeah, no, definitely something that when you finish it, and you just sit there with that like dread feeling afterwards. You kind of really need a bit of time to just wash it away. Like you kind of have that sort of like third party PTSD feeling for it. So it's not a film you want to watch closely together for a second time. Like put some comedies in between, something to take your mind off it. But it's definitely one of those films that, you know, if you've got a friend or a family member who ask a lot of questions, they're not the ones you take to this movie because you have answered one question, you've missed a very key moment in that film. So it's definitely one that you need to experience and be there as part of it. And ultimately, it is a journey film that takes you from point A to point Z and everywhere in between, that has you feeling every emotion except for joy, because that film had very little. Like, yes, French Girl was an adorable moment, but that fleeted very quickly. So it's definitely one that it's a journey. It's a journey.
Yeah, definitely is. Um, yeah. To be honest, what more can we say?